Okay, so now we're going to kind of like delve in a little bit to some of the controllers that are out there that can help control the environment better. The first thing is a temperature controller. The temperature just reads the temperature, obviously. I mean, it's just a controller that helps turn fans on and off, air conditioners on and off, and also it controls the relative humidity in the room. Here's a picture, an example of what one of those controllers look like. There's a lot of manufacturers that make these types of controllers. There's CAP, that stands for Custom Automated Products. There's Sentinel. There's Green Air. There's several different types of controllers that you can get out there, and each one has its own different functions. Some of the other type of controllers that you have is just strictly humidity. I mean, you have some that are just dehumidifiers, and I control dehumidifiers to make sure that there's not enough or too much humidity in your room. A lot of times if it gets really dry in the room, you'll see your leaves start to crisp up a little bit because it's so dry. You got to be careful of that. They get windburn and things like that. And also there's times when it's just so humid in a room that it's just breeding grounds for mold and powdery mildew. So you got to get a dehumidifier in the room. Be careful of dehumidifiers though, because dehumidifiers sometimes will dry your plants out and dry your buds out. So you got to be careful of that. And that's what the humidity controller is for. Whether it's on a temperature controller, whether it's a combo controller, whatever it is, you obviously see the picture. So it can be anything as far as that goes. You just want to make sure you're controlling the right functions. The other type of controller is called a lighting controller. And this lighting controller will actually turn your lights on and off. What you want to do is you want to take the main wire that's coming from your breaker and plug it into this light controller and hardwire it. And then you have what's called a trip wire that comes out of the controller itself, and this plugs into a timer which plugs into the wall. And once that trip timer trips, then it turns on the power for all your lights. Here's an example of what a lighting controller looks like. And the lighting controllers, the people that manufacture lighting controllers out there is CAP, Custom Automated Products. Those are probably some of the best ones, the MLCs. You also have flip boxes. Those are another type of lighting controller which gives you the ability to turn a certain amount of lights on, and when those shut off, another certain amount of lights turn on. So this way you're able to control two different rooms on two different cycles and not all turning on at the same time and sucking up a lot of juice. It's better for the power consumption that way. And it's also better for just the power period by having two separate cycles on opposite cycles like that. So lighting controllers work in that type of fashion. You want to make sure you're very careful when you're hooking it all up. If you need an electrician or electrical advice, please consult a professional to be able to do that. Always practice safety standards when you're messing with electricity because it's very important. And the last controller that there is a CO2 controller. Okay, so I was kind of explaining about that in the CO2 section of another class. But basically it's like a little machine that controls the CO2 through sensitive instruments. It has a sensitive sensor that you stick on the far end of the room, and this way you'll know exactly what your parts per million is for your CO2. Here's an example of what a CO2 controller looks like. Okay, so when you look at it, this one's made by Sentinel, and this one is it has a photocell on it, which tells me whether it's day or night, and you can set it to where you're not going to have it on during the nighttime hours and it will never turn on. It also has a CO2 set point, which is what you set the parts per million to be at. So basically this CO2 controller is going to turn the CO2 generator on and off to maintain whatever parts per million you set it at. So if you set it at 1500 parts per million, it's going to turn on and turn on the CO2, and it's going to go above the 1500 parts per million mark, and then it's going to shut off. And then when it shuts off, that number is going to slowly drop and drop and drop and drop until it gets to below 1500 parts per million. And then it's going to shut it back on again. And it's just going to keep it in that range so you can maintain the most adequate CO2 parts per million as possible. Whether it's 1500, whether it's 1400, whether it's 2000, it doesn't really matter. It's just going to maintain that level. So with the CO2 controller, there's also a fuzzy logic option, and the only time you want to use a fuzzy logic option is when you're using compressed CO2. If you're using a CO2 generator, it's a lot more accurate, so you don't need to use the fuzzy logic option. If you're going to use the compressed gas option, you're going to have a CO2 regulator that connects to the tank, and then they'll have a plug that comes out of it. You plug that directly into the Sentinel, and the Sentinel will control it and will know how much in the room accurately there is when it comes to the parts per million of the CO2. So that concludes our chapter for controllers.